Good morning. Good morning. I remember the first time I was ever slapped in the face. She was a cute little thing. Her name was Marty. We were in nursery school. I was known as the kissing bee, and I would go around kissing everyone. And I leaned over and planted a big one on her cheek, and she hauled off and slapped me into the next week. And I remember the pain. It hurt my feelings, it hurt my little ego, and it hurt the hell out of my little face. Oh boy. It would not be the last time I would be slapped in the face. All of the other slaps in the face felt good. And I hope in the next few moments you'll understand what I'm referring to. Transformative rebirth. That's why we're here, right? At the end of our life, we hope to look back on our life and see that we have become better for having lived it. Not necessarily better than the person seated next to us, but better than we were when we first began. Transformative rebirth occurred for me about 12 years ago. I was an invasive cardiologist, a very busy practice. My average day was 15, 16 hours. And my family and I had planned a much needed vacation to Lake Mohawk, a place about an hour south of here. And you know what it's like the last day of work. You know, everybody's trying to milk you for everything you're worth. And I got home around 8:30, piled the family in the Suburban, and off to Lake Mohawk we go. And on the way down, my wife, Angela, trying to make small talk, interrupted my thoughts. And my thoughts were still back at work, thinking about what I may have forgotten to do. And in her conversation, she said, "You know, honey, we really need a new vacuum cleaner." The last thing I wanted to think about at that point in time was a new vacuum cleaner, and I kind of told her so, and it went something like this. "You know, honey, you've been talking about this vacuum cleaner forever. I don't care what you spend. Just get whatever you want." Well, needless to say, the rest of the trip was a very quiet one. And when we got to the cabin, I knew just what I was supposed to do. I went straight to my room. The next morning, I got up, and I generally rise earlier than the rest of the family. And what I do to unwind is I go down to the lake, I get down on my knees, and I pull weeds. It's very grounding for me. It gets me back to source, back to God. And I'd been out there for a couple hours, and Angela had since gotten up and left to go to the grocery store. Now, I knew that I was still in the doghouse because usually she would yell down, "I love you, honey." But she didn't do that this morning. So she was gone about 5 minutes. Now, Lake Mohawk is a big oval lake, about 10 miles in circumference. Our place was at 9 o'clock, front gates at 6 o'clock. It's about a 2.5-mile trip. And she had been gone about 5 minutes when I heard her call my name. Now, the strange thing was, I heard her call my name from behind me, and behind me was just forest. But I stood up and even looked into the forest, thinking, she's in no mood to sneak up behind me and say boo. But I paused nonetheless. And after a while, went back to my weed pulling, and a few minutes later, my daughter Layla came out of the cabin running, yelling and screaming, "Daddy, come quick, come quick." Went running up to the top of the hill, and when I got up there, she said, "Mommy's at the front gate. There's a man dying, and they need you." So I hopped in the car, made the 5-minute trip in about 3 minutes. And as I pulled up, there certainly was a gentleman who was in a cardiac arrest, a few people frantically trying to resuscitate him. I felt like Moses. As I came up, I said, "I'm a cardiologist, can I help?" Well, with that, the waters part, and now it's my baby, okay? This guy was in a full cardiac arrest. We were in Carroll County where there was not 911 service. So I got there before the paramedics got there. Started to do CPR on him. About the same time, the paramedics arrived with the one piece of equipment that I needed. That was a defibrillator. Shocked him about 4 times. He did regain a pulse, but did not start breathing. So I intubated him. I put a tube down his throat and offered to ride with him up to the nearest facility. When we arrived at the Canton Hospital, I started to approach his wife just to tell her that my thoughts and prayers were with her. But things were so hectic, I just decided to send her a little prayer silently and hopped back in the ambulance. Back to Lake Mohawk we went. It was on the way back that it hit me. I heard my wife call my name. My wife, Angela, is the most spiritual person you'd ever want to meet. She's always believed in these sorts of things, but I'm a scientist. You got to prove it to me. So I wasn't about to tell her what I experienced. Rather, I asked her what she had experienced. And she said her first thought when she first pulled up was to turn around and go get me. But she knew that for every minute someone remains in a cardiac arrest, his or her chance of survival drops by 10%. So she knew the 5-minute trip there and back, it would have been too late for him. Her second thought was, you're under so much stress. This is your vacation. Leave well enough alone, someone else will handle it. Said she couldn't do that either. So I asked her what happened next, and she said, I couldn't remember the phone number because we're down there so infrequently. And I asked, what did you do next? She said, I just called your name out. Now, as God's my witness, I heard my wife call my name. Paul Harvey, page 2. That night, the phone rings. And it's the wife of the man that I'd helped to resuscitate. And she was so thankful. She said, Dr. Gordon, you came up and said you were a cardiologist. I just knew an angel had arrived. At which point I referred her to my mother because I've certainly never been called one of those before. But she said, we're just so thankful that you happened to be there when our loved one needed you. And we want to get you something. I said, man, you don't understand. Being able to help your husband, being able to help save a life is the most invigorating thing that I can do. She said, no, we absolutely insist. She said, we're working people. We work for Hoover. Can we buy you a vacuum cleaner? Now, if that doesn't get your attention, nothing will. What happened for me was a change in the thought. Everything in life is a thought. If you think about it, what you think of this boring speech is your thought of this boring speech. What you think of your everything is a thought, and you can change that thought anytime you want to. My good friend Dr. Wayne Dyer often says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And it is so true. Where I used to say, I'll believe it when I see it, I've changed that paradigm of thought to I'll see it when I believe it. It's totally different. It was a transformative rebirth of the way that I think. About 2 years ago, my daughter Maddie Rose came home from Chicago where she was working. And I was up in my office working, and she walked in, and it's a parent's sixth sense. I could tell something was awry. There was this heaviness that dripped from her. And I asked her, I said, sweetie, what's up? And she said, Dada, she's 27, calls me Dada. She says, Dada, I always thought that the older I got, the more control I assumed over my life, the easier life would become. And then a single tear trickled down her cheek, and she said, but it's not working out that way. And I pulled her up into my lap and kind of rocked her the way I have all of her life. And it took me a while to get my thoughts together because I knew what I was getting ready to say to her would be very important. And I said, sweetie, I don't think that's the way it's supposed to be. I think if we are to progress in this thing we call life, if we are to become more enlightened, we must face greater and greater obstacles. It's only by overcoming those obstacles, those hardships, that we actually grow, that we progress. We should actually be grateful for the crap that comes our way. There's an expression from the Kabbalah, the ancient mystical text of Judaism, that says, the falls of our life provide us the energy to propel us onto a higher path. The falls of our life. I kissed her on the forehead and left it at that. The next morning at 6:40, I received the second worst phone call a parent could get. The gray voice on the other end of the line informed me that our son Tyler had been involved in a car accident, and he had shattered his neck. And then came the dreaded words, your son is quadriplegic. You can't imagine. You think you prepare yourself for those sorts of phone, you just can't imagine. They were in the process of life flighting him from Durango, Colorado to Denver, where he would undergo emergency surgery. Within an hour of receiving the news, I had hastily packed a bag and bolted from the house. And it was speeding up to the Cleveland airport trying to get on an overbooked flight that I realized that I had left my wife wailing. Wailing. And yet I couldn't stay to console her because I had to get to Denver in time to see our son and have him see me before his surgery. Somehow I got a seat on this overbooked flight. I was fifth in line. I was placed in a window seat, and I was like a caged cat. I was now incommunicado. I didn't know if Tyler was alive, dead, brain damaged, bleeding out from internal organ injuries. I was crazed. The thoughts were banging around inside my head so loudly I could hear them. And I felt like I was in the inside of a tornado. And it was loud, and it was whooshing, and it was cold, and it was frightening. And as I looked down the cone, I could see only darkness. And I remember praying to God, just God help. Not, don't help me, but help me help my family. And gradually, that cold, loud whooshing sound changed. And I became enveloped in a cocoon of white noise, strand by strand. It was a place of unfathomable peace. And I remember saying to God, I can't do this. And I prayed. And I can't honestly tell you I heard the voice of God, but the message was clear. And God said, okay, Terry, just yesterday, you gave your daughter wise counsel. You shared with her truth. You can talk the talk, but now you must walk it. And I remember saying, but God, I don't think I can do this. And the answer was clear. Yes, you can. I said, but how? How do I do this? The most profound thought came to me when God said, treat this as if it was something you had chosen. Something I had chosen. Why would I choose something like this? Why would I choose a tragedy like this? The answer is that a tragedy is only a tragedy if you make it one. But I was being given a choice. A choice of a new way to look at adversity. A way to transform suffering into insight. Lao Tzu, who wrote a book called the Tao Te Ching, 2,500 years before the birth of Christ, talks about the non-duality in life. We all kind of think there's good and there's evil. There's light and there's darkness. They're really one and the same. I quote, "Under heaven, all can see beauty as beauty, only because there is ugliness. The difficult is born in the easy. Long is defined by short. The high by the low." The tragedy is going through something like this and not learning from it. That's the tragedy. What I'm about to share with you is one of the most profound things I've learned from this experience. And that is, living inside each of us, there are two selves. One self is based in the material plane, in the physical world. It's limited. It's mortal. It can be irreversibly altered by disease, by injury, even by our thoughts. The other self resides on a much higher plane, a much higher level of consciousness. It is the authentic self. It is the self that is immortal. It is the self that transcends above the quagmire and passively observes without judgment. My self that resides on the physical plane aches from the pain of watching my son endure an ocean of suffering. My spiritual self has been able to transcend above that, passively watching, passively learning, passively becoming more enlightened. Mundaka Upanishad, like two birds of golden plumage, inseparable companions, the individual self and the immortal self are perched on the same branch of the tree. The former tastes of the sweet and bitter fruits of the tree. The latter, tasting of neither, calmly observes. The experience that I've had came at just the right time. The lesson that I am to learn needed a tool to allow me to go through it. The lesson I'm learning is totally different than the lesson my son will learn. It's totally different than the one my wife will learn or my children. Everything is in perfect order. Even this. The falls of our life, they give us the energy to propel us onto that higher path. They allow us to transform, transcending to a higher place where growth, enlightenment, and even healing become manifest. That is the place of rebirth. Namaste.